Walter Russell, mediocrity is self-inflicted. Genius is self-bestowed. Moving on to the Platonic solids. This is how sound, or cymatics, that made those patterns I just showed you, and that's on a flat surface. If you put it into a three-dimensional or even four-dimensional surface, those patterns literally create geometry that nature sustains and holds as self-renewing. And there are 5 main ones named after Plato called the Platonic solids. The first 4 elements are all encoded by the number 9, which is the breathing, expansion, and contraction of form. So the vortex actually creates these forms, quite literally. The thing that makes a Platonic solid Platonic is that when you put these shapes inside of a sphere, every line or ray touches the sphere and is also equidistant from each other. There's only 5 known Platonic solids in the world, and they refer to different harmonic vibrations in the Hermetic teachings of nature, of natural cosmic principles, which we call elements. So the triangle would be fire, and the octahedron would be air, and the hexahedron would be earth, and the icosahedron would be water, and of course the dodecahedron would be ether. Notice the degrees of angles when we look at the Platonic solids in 2 dimensions. 180 degrees is 180 is 9, 180 is 9, 3, 6, and 0 is 9, 180 is 9, 5 and 4 is 9. When you multiply them by their number of sides, right? So you multiply this base polyhedron by the number of sides to make it a 3-dimensional form. So you get 720 degrees, 1440 degrees, 216 degrees. Every single one of those adds up to 9, a digital root of 9, with the exception of the dodecahedron. And if you don't believe me that there is sacred geometry, that it is real, and that the vortex is the building blocks of nature, I would just refer to the great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. I hope that you guys can hear the music. Moving on to the great esotericist and hermeticist Thomas H. Burgoyne. The soul sends forth its pleading cry for light. Who and what is God? Faintly, the distant vesper sounds upon the cooling eve. Comes the answer. Who and what art thou? What can thou see? What delectable blessing does nature vouchsafe to the pure in heart, the intelligence of the heart? We tremble with awful yet thrilling revelation. We know dimly, yet fail to realize in our outward consciousness the full import thereof. We realize wherein the mistaken selfhood hath become the only begotten of the Father. Let me repeat that. We realize wherein the mistaken selfhood hath become the only begotten of the Father. But the revelation is too much and too little. We know as faint as the voice seemed to be the unprepared soul, an echo only. It was the voice of the Adonai behind the veil. And now we crave the knowledge of where and the whither. Just again referring to how we have fallen away from center, fallen away from knowing our own divine union with Spirit. Burgoyne continues, O child of Adam. And Adam again is just atum or aton or atom. It just means wholeness. O child of Adam, know these 3 things. Eternity is the creator of the universal life. Universal life creates the world. The world is the creator of time. And these, The universe is life, and the world is mind, and the time is soul. Soul, the sum total of experience. And this is individual conscious life. The die is cast, the wings are spread. Notice, this is the individual soul, the individual conscious life. Moving on to the great philosopher, Martin Heidegger. If I take death to my life, acknowledge it, and face it squarely, I will free myself from the anxiety of death and the pettiness of life, and only then will I be free to become myself. So this is, again, doing shadow work, transcending the fears that you're going to die. And in that process, some of the great philosophers and mystics truly believe they are eternal, that the self is sovereign, empowered truly by the Spirit. He goes on to say, understanding of being is itself a determination of being. This is known as das Ein. Again, it's a sovereign statement stating that the understanding of your own being is determined by you. You are it. Martin Heidegger. And this is echoed also in some biblical scriptures. This is Corinthians. You are the temple of God, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. You yourself are even another little world and have within you the sun and the moon and also the stars. And then my favorite from the Gospel of Thomas. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. Lack of awareness of your own divinity and sovereignty is poverty. From the great Judo Krishnamurti. The more you know yourself, the more clarity there is. Self-knowledge has no end. You don't come to an achievement. You don't come to a conclusion. It is an endless river. He's speaking of the apophatic process. If the psychic energies of the average mass of people watching a football game or a musical comedy could be diverted into the rational channels of freedom, they would be invincible. Wilhelm Reich. The fastest way to dissolve empire is to cultivate your own power and excellence. From Neil Kramer. And when he's talking about empire, he's talking about the propaganda perpetuated by current Western society, which is just television, media, and radio telling us all that we need to look like this, act like that, dress like this, talk like that, watch this, read that, be popular. All of this is a distraction from our own selves. All this is doing is trying to make you into a sadist, make you into an object, make you into a machine. And that's actually what Big Brother, if you want to call it that, wants. Not necessarily because they're evil, but because it's working. Because they put forth this minutia of garbage and have sold it to us, and we're actually believing it. It's time to stop this. It's time to cultivate your own power and excellence. Neil Kramer. And Osho echoes this when he's talking about schools of religions and gurus and teachers. Your whole idea about yourself is borrowed from those who have no idea of who they are themselves. Moving on to Manly P. Hall, the teachings of all ages. Very syncretic. He was a Freemason, Kabbalist, psychology, philosophy. Great writer. Wrote The Occult Anatomy of Man. When the mob governs, man is ruled by ignorance. When the church governs, he is ruled by superstition. And when the state governs, he is ruled by fear. Before men can live together in harmony and understanding, ignorance must be transmuted into wisdom, superstition into illumined faith, and fear into love. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, and yet everybody rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. Ourselves. No work or love will flourish out of guilt, fear, or hollowness of heart, just as no valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now. All right, continuing on, skipping over this R.H. Waller de Lubbock's slide, and following up where Terence McKenna left off about the intelligence of the heart. Michael Tessarian puts it like this, speaking about the aesthetic response in regard to Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. This is basically highlighting that our antipathy to nature is self-destructive. This sensibility and capacity, once awakened, is the main characteristic that serves to separate one human being from another. It is the manner by which authenticity and individuality are achieved. This is because an aesthetic response to the landscape or a piece of music or art, etc., cannot be shared or quantified. It cannot be measured. Each person's response is individually their own. So here, again, he's just speaking of the divine, unique signature of each human being as a divine self. And he's saying that we do share an agreement of reality where we're all in the same location and we might be looking at the same event or listening to the same piece of music, but we don't all hear it the same. Matter of fact, nobody hears it the same. It's dictated by a great deal by your own inner self as to how you perceive it, how you hear it, how it resonates within your bodily temple. And then Pythagoras, the great Pythagoras, goes on to talk about the power of light and primarily the sun, but just talking about how the sun is not just this inanimate ball of energy that's warming us. It's much more than that. It's actually conscious. And the ancients all felt this way. They all felt that the heavenly bodies were not just orbs floating around, but they were actually aware of themselves or self-conscious. So Pythagoras says it like this: the light of the physical sun warms and reveals the bodies of things. The light of the light of the psychic sun nourishes and reveals the structure of the soul. The light of the spiritual sun sustains and nourishes the human spirit. The sun is birthing the Trinity on our solar system. It is a three-aspect body of physic, psychic, and spirit. A deity is an infinite being whose body is composed of the substance of light, and whose soul is composed of the substance of truth. Truth is therefore a kind of light, and when it shines, a kind of darkness is dissipated. Truth is to the darkness of ignorance what the physical sun is to the darkness of nature. There is also a spiritual sun, and the total energy of this sun dissipates total illusion. That is, morality and materiality. So he's saying here that the spiritual sun and the total energy dissipates the total illusion of morality and of materiality. So that's basically saying where the human steps in the way of what's actually happening. Moving on. The spiritual sun is forever dispelling the kind of darkness which we call death. The psychic sun is forever dispelling the kind of darkness we call ignorance. And the physical sun is forever dissipating crystallization. Friedrich Schelling says in such a short phrase that sums it all up so brilliantly, nature is visible spirit, as spirit is invisible nature. Think about that. Theodore Roszak, going more into the psychological side of this, speaking of the id, or a part of the ego, the id conserves from its long maturing process our treasury of ecological intelligence. Its intractability stems from its deeply ingrained resistance to all social forms that endanger the harmony of the human and the natural. Its untamed selfishness represents a bond between psyche and cosmos, whose distant origins reach back to the initial conditions of the Big Bang. Or when he says Big Bang, just the original conditions of what we consider to be the beginning. Schwaller-Delubics again. The temple of man corpifies the divine functions or principles, the netters, which is again where we get the word nature, both as physical edifice created according to the divine proportions of gnomic growth, and literally through the embodiment of the divine in man, which was in fact the raison d'etre of Luxor temple, which means the reason to be. Basically the whole reason why the Luxor temple was built in the first place and why it was built the way it was built, what symbolic meaning it has. Human physiology is a physical product of metaphysical principles. As such, the organs of human perception, from the physical to the subtle, are, at the same time, the instruments of the divine perception. Overall, Schwaller emphasized how a profound anthropocosmic philosophy was encoded in every physical aspect of the construction of the Egyptian divine temple, and, more than this, that a profoundly intuitive, irrational intelligence, superior to our divisive rationalism, lay at the heart of Egyptian civilization. In summation, he means all the physical, everything we see as a physical product or manifestation is actually a product of the metaphysical. Again, consciousness creates the form, not the other way around. And the temple of man, just so you know, you can't see the image I have in front of me, but it's so brilliantly built over, roughly over a 400-year period by many different pharaohs. And they built it as the human body with the phi ratio and with the pi ratio encoded in the entire temple. So when you look at it from the sky, it's basically the human body. And we see this reflection not only in their temples, but we see it again in vortex mathematics. We see it in the way that the roots of a tree grow downward into a tendril, into the shapes, the spiraling shapes of the roots. And that is actually reflected above ground in the branching and the spiraling vortex branching of the shape of the tree itself as it blooms and blossoms. We also see this in Walter Russell's periodic table, which is the same elements that we know as a periodic table, but the 17 inert gases are broken down into a harmonic, just like a piano. So that harmonic is actually moving as a waveform, cresting and troughing. And if you were to map this or draw it, you'd see that it's actually it's an octave. So it actually follows musical notes. Moving on, for each and every form is merely a passing instant, a transient aspect of the divine light. He wrote in a posthumuously published note, quote, "This is why things only die in their form, and why every death is the source of new life. Only the divine light is deathless, because it is bornless, and therefore fixed and eternal." Wow. Powerful statement by R.A. Schwaller-Delubics. And if you really, 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 really think about it, it makes sense. He says this is why things only die in their form, and why every death is the source of a new life. So we think about it, we see that all forms dissolve, all bodies fall away. And Giordano Bruno so brilliantly and eloquently wrote about this. So death is just the dissolving of the form, but death is not the end of life. Life continues on. And so in that sense, dropping the form or dissolving the form is actually the source of regeneration or new life. Black elk, the Native American Lakota, the first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all of its powers. And when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells Wonkantanka, and that This center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. Wankantanka means holy, that which is holy. Throw this one in here from Gurdjieff, G.I. Gurdjieff. Conscious faith is freedom. Emotional faith is slavery. Mechanical faith is foolishness. Pretty straightforward. Khalil Gibran, quoting the great poet, "They deem me mad because I will not sell my days for gold, and I deem them mad because they think my days have a price." Boom. Khalil Gibran is just pointing out the divinity of the human being, that we are not materialistic, we are not reduced to some sort of worker bee, we are not reduced to a collective hive mentality. We are individuals, we are sovereign, and our days really are priceless. They do not have a price. We are the divine of the vine, the spiraling within sovereign. Ezra Pound brilliantly puts this Stockholm syndrome, this psychological problem when someone who is abused or beaten or enslaved on a subconscious level identifies with their abuser. And they won't leave them, even when the gates to freedom are open. Ezra Pound says, "A slave is one who waits for someone to come and free him." Brilliantly put. Why wait? No one's coming for you. Free yourself. Rudolf Steiner, "Our highest endeavor must be to develop free human beings who are able of themselves to impart purpose and direction to their lives." Pretty straightforward. Quoting from my book, Sun King, The Soul Harmonica, this is an excerpt from page 70, and it deals a little bit with the Toma and the Nagual and number theory, but basically saying it's all about duality and unity. So, the infinite consciousness, also known as the Nagual, in terms of numbers, is oneness as being irreducible. It has no split or division. It is non-dual. And in the creation by it, man is born, and he is still encoded oneness, but is split or dual. He is dual because by design he is created as the density of matter, or mortal body, and the levity of spirit, or immortal body, at the same time. So here what I'm saying is, we are dual because we sense something different between our physical body and that which is outside of us, or non-physical. So there's a split there that we feel psychologically as dual. Man is both, but by his divine design encodes oneness. He is the reducible one as long as he has a physical body. Being reducible gives rise to the number 2, and duality is manifested. Now, the manifestation of geometry can build into dimensions, and this is why geometry is at the very least a 3-dimensional, and now we have the number 3. The Trinity gives rise to the form as we sense it by our bodies. The body of man will eventually be dissolved into earth. This is the reducible part of his oneness. Whereas God, or infinite consciousness, has no body and cannot be reduced. It is all that is. Seeing this is cosmomimetic, meaning we become a reflection of the universal consciousness itself. We understand, finally, we are directly in contact with reality itself. So these are my own words, but what I'm saying here is, when you can practice transcendent states, practice unifying your duality, or your perceived duality, you end up in a state of wholeness, oneness, or cosmomimetic, which means you're tapping into infinite consciousness or universal consciousness, which is reality itself, because infinity has no body. It has no body to drop, has no form. Moving on, what is consciousness? The Walter Russell definition. Consciousness is the spiritual light of mind, or the source of all seeming motion and energy that exists in stillness and silence. The universal one, God, Creator, etc., is wholly mind and simulates all idea by dividing stillness to create the illusion of motion where no motion is. Therefore, all motion extends from and returns to the same source. Walter Russell's language is pretty heavy. It's incredible. You really have to meditate on it, but we talked about this a little bit earlier. It's basically saying that whatever is the fastest thing in the universe, let's say in this case the speed of light, is everywhere, in all places, always. And if that is true, if it's everywhere, then it's actually not moving at all. It's perfectly still. A huge concept to be able to wrap your mind around. So when you're talking about the infinite universe, it has no container, which means it has no distance, which means it has no time, which actually means it has no motion. It's perfectly still. Carlos Castaneda. The trick is in what we emphasize. We either make ourselves miserable or we make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same. One of my favorite quotes, because as you know, there's lots of pain in the world, lots of reasons to be a victim, lots of reasons to place blame on others. And what Carlos is so brilliantly saying is that we have much more power than we realize. When we step into our center or our sovereignty, we actually realize that with the same amount of energy that we make ourselves upset, or make ourselves neurotic, or make ourselves anxious, or make ourselves fearful, that same amount of energy is the same amount required to make ourselves strong, to make ourselves noble, sovereign, free, caring, loving, open, etc. Chief Crazy Horse. I salute the light within your eyes, where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at the center within yourself, and I, with mine, we shall be as one. This is the Hermetic Signature from the book Opening of the Way by Isha Schwaller de Lubbock's. Explanation is one thing, meditation is another. Both are necessary. So we shall let the heart speak, without concern for what men may say. The Spirit bloweth where it listeth, and not where men desire. Truth is that which is, not what men imagine. The destiny of the earth is written in the sun and moon, and not in the science of men. The heredity of the person, in quotes, is written in his liver, not in human records. His destiny can be read in his eyes, in his hands, and in his face, but these are to men a secret cipher. His true name is the impulse which brought him to earth. Only is his experience and his appearance has a name among men. The place which has drawn him down to human earth is his country of adoption. And if the throne of his heart is empty, then the end of life for him will have all the horror of endless exile. But if his heart is the throne of his immortal self, then his true country is the place in heaven whence he descended, and his place of exile is among men. Signature of the Divine Man. And in closing, I'm just going to read a quote from Michael Tessarian, talking again about the persona and the reflection of ourselves. He's speaking about the transformative process and experiences when people spend time with animals. He says, well, of course there's transformation with animals. Why? Because animals don't relate to you as a shadow or a persona, not a personality. The animal's relationship to you is only as a self, even if you yourself are not in a state of selfhood. This is miraculous. That's why people say it's healing to be around animals. The animal is not buying into all that persona stuff. The animal relates to a person as purely itself. So you now learn about the mystery of selfhood and humanness from relationships with animals and what we call the inanimate. You have to fall in love with that which is not animate, that which you mistakenly think is dead. See, the problem with us is that human beings always want to spend most of their time and energy getting into relationships with other human beings, because human beings give us back all those cues and affectations that our egos desire, creating the social society, the social persona. But there is a whole other magic world out there. For example, when have you last talked to the light around you? Or listened to the winds? When have you last addressed the air or the ocean? The sky is painted a different hue for you every few minutes. Do you notice it? There is simplicity all around you. You can't say which is more beautiful, a dead rose or a live rose. Nature is painting her picture for you every single day, and there is a miracle going on everywhere. Have you deeply looked at the skin of a fruit? Are you aware of the present beauty in a decaying building, or in a rusted lamppost, or a guitar, or a piano? Are you aware of the intense beauty of that? No, no, no. We are all looking to other humans because we are so in need of dependency, while there is a whole other panoply out there, a whole incredible magical, mystical tradition out there in the world. We are not even aware of it. It is nature, and the beauty of the creatures and animals, and what they can teach us. So, the full and the whole human being consciously desists from a lot of his relationships with other humans to willingly become very, very aware of the inanimate around him. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger says, in the German language, the word for thinking, danken, is exactly the same root as danke, which is thank you or gratitude, meaning that every thought that you think should be an act of gratitude. Is it? So, the true human being, from the moment he opens his eyes, is in a state of gratitude for his life, his presence, and for his beingness. And with that, I say thank you. Thank you for listening. Please share. The sovereign self is what we are.